Is the day I have been looking for forever. We are going to be talking about communism. Yes, communism.
We're still communists.
Communism. You wish we still were communists. Yes, and up here I have on my wall over here a picture of famous communists throughout the world. Welcome to the party over here. In the center is the guy we're going to be talking about today, Karl Marx, the founder of communism.
I wish I had my
Little V.I. Lenin, the leader of the Bolshevik or Russian Revolution, November 7th, 1917. Uncle Joe Stalin, the totalitarian dictator of the Soviet Union during World War II. Yes. Fidel Castro killed basically somewhere between 20 and 80 million people.
Good for him, he has
Mao Zedong probably killed between 60 and 100,000 people. And Fidel Castro of Cuba.
Of Cuba. Where's my air horn when I need it?
Okay, so, ladies and gentlemen, today we're going to be talking about communism and where that comes out of and where it comes from. Now, yesterday we talked about Hegel at the end of the hour.
Yeah.
Okay, any questions about Hegel? Hegel's going to say that history is just a series of conflicts, a clash of ideas. One idea, thesis, an antithesis, the opposite of the idea, and then you have a synthesis that comes out of that conflict. And history, as he says, is the zigzagging slaughter bench of ideas. Now, the next guy that we're taking a look at today is Karl Marx.
Yes.
And Karl Marx is a German philosopher. And you see the dates of his life up there, 1818 to 1883. Marx, excuse me, was really writing in response to the Industrial Revolution. I've already kind of introduced the Industrial Revolution to you a little bit. Marx saw the Industrial Revolution as really exploiting the working class. He saw that the working class was being taken advantage of. Because in a factory, who was basically making all of the money? The factory owners. Okay? Making all of the factory owners. And the workers were basically interchangeable parts who were living in near abject poverty. Now, who's actually doing all of the work? The workers, hence the name worker. Okay? Yeah. So what he's saying is that we've got to make this better. And were the working conditions safe in the Industrial Revolution?
No.
Well, they were terrible. Terrible. So he's wanting to fix all of this stuff. So he starts out his career in Germany, which was industrialized. He then is expelled from Germany and goes to Britain, where he writes, and Britain is also a heavily industrialized country. And so this is all about that. As I said, he's a Hegelian, which means that he did buy into this idea that history is driven by conflict. But unlike Hegel, who believed it's a conflict of ideas, Marx believed that there is one particular type of conflict that drives it all. And that one particular type of conflict is what he calls class conflict. And what do we mean by class conflict?
Like social class?
Social classes. Yeah, social class. And he's going to argue, basically, that history is always driven by social class struggles. Okay? And the rich, how they become rich, is because they take from other people. That's the essence of his argument. Let's say, for example, okay, Emma, what's your favorite type of pizza? Hawaiian pizza. That's a bold choice. Hawaiian pizza. So let's say we've got a Hawaiian pizza. What pizza company do you like best? Restaurant. Domino's. A Domino's Hawaiian pizza. You got a Domino's Hawaiian pizza right here. So there are only 8 slices, let's say. The pizza's divided into 8 slices, which I think is pretty typical, right? Okay. Now, that's true. That is true. You raise a good point. Okay. So we've got our 8 pieces. Now, if I want to be the fattest man possible or the richest man possible, because think about this for me as as richness here. What do I want to do to that pizza?
Eat all of it.
Eat all of it myself. So, if I want all of this, if I want it for the benefit of me, do I share it with anybody else?
No.
Absolutely not. I may divide up 1 or 2 of those pieces among the 22 of you in here. Okay? So you don't necessarily just keel off and die on me. However, that's about all I do. Okay? That's about all I do. Just enough to keep you sustained. And you might say, well, Reeves, why are you talking about endless Hawaiian pizza? Because for Marx, wealth is a zero-sum game. Okay? There's only a pizza pie. And if you're going to be rich, what do you have to do?
Eat it all.
You have to take as much of that pie, eat as much of that pizza pie as you can. Okay? So, he is going to be looking, his analysis of what everything is going to be based on what he terms, and I'm going to write this term on the board here for you, something called the means of production. And what the means of production is basically this notion. The means of production is basically the notion of how you are going to, be able to amass or build wealth. Okay? And what's the means of production in an industrial economy? Own a factory. If it's agricultural, what's the means of production? Owning land. Okay, very good. So you understand what the means of production are. Well, Marx, as I said, is a Hegelian. So he's going to be looking at the concept of, he's going to say that history is important. And he's going to say that there are 5 stages in history. 5. Count them, 5 stages in history. And during these stages, you're going to have the development of class conflict. Okay, stage number 1, he's going to say, is the stage of hunter-gatherers. The earliest man and woman, earliest humans, were hunters and gatherers. Which, how did they economically get stuff? They did what? They gathered and hunted. They're like, oh, berries! I'm going to eat them. Yum. Oh, bison. Club. Eat them. Okay? Not that you're a bison. I'm trying to imply that. Okay? Just scarred you immensely by calling you a bison publicly. No, that's what but you get the idea. You know what I'm talking about here, right? Okay? So you hunt and gather. Who owns the means of production in a hunting and gathering society? Either everybody or nobody. Because who owns the bison? Nobody. Who owns the berries? Nobody. So, years ago when I was a freshman in college, I took an anthropology class. A lot of fun. And my professor, Dr. Michael Davis, had studied the Yanomamo tribe of the Amazon. A primitive tribe that didn't have contact with people up until maybe about the 1940s, okay, with the outside world. And they were still hunters and gatherers. And you know how many hours on average they worked a week?
25.
15.
That's close.
You were close. Now in the United States, the average work week, we say 40 is the ideal, but most people work 50. And, on one hand, people would look at hunter-gatherers as primitive people, but who's really the smarter folks? People who work 15 hours a week or people who work 50 hours a week? Anyway, so the first stage is hunter-gatherer. Okay, does that make sense? The second stage then is going to be agricultural. Okay? People soon realize, I don't have to go out and find or forage for the food. I don't have to go out and hunt the food. What can I do? I can grow the food. I can take plants and I can figure out how to plant them and their seeds in the ground and harvest them. I can take the biggest, meatiest, stupidest animals and breed them with other big, meaty, stupid animals so they won't eat me. But instead, I will eat them. Okay? So that's the beginning of agriculture. That second stage is agricultural. But what's the problem? What's going to happen now that you have agriculture? What are you going to start having to develop? Social classes or economic classes. Why? Because what's the means of production in agriculture? Land. Very good. Land. So if you own the land, it means you're going to be wealthier than somebody else. Correct? Okay? Okay. Third stage. All right, have I lost anyone yet? This makes sense. Third stage for Karl Marx is feudalism. Now, do you remember feudalism? Medieval feudalism? So, with agriculture, you had several people owning land, but in feudalism, who owns the land?
Everybody?
No.
The king?
The king and the lords, the nobles. Very few people. You know, like the top 3 or 4% of society owns the entire means of production. The lords, the nobles, the king.
So does everyone else just work for them?
And so everyone just works for them. Okay? And the serfs have a lot of rights.
No.
No. And how did the kings and the nobles justify their right to rule over all of these lands? Yeah, divine right. Very good. Divine right. So, what they're going to say then is, you know, and he's going to be critical of religion, which we'll talk about here in just a little bit. So, the third stage is feudal. The fourth stage for Marx is going to be industrial capitalism. Industrial capitalism. Of course, what's the means of production in industrial capitalism? What is it? The spray?
Factories?
Factories.
Yes.
It's factories.
Yes.
Okay? Okay? And so you're going to have people who own factories. And the people who own the factories,
Oh, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry.
I'm probably misspelling this and I apologize, is the bourgeoisie. Okay? The people who work in the factories, the factory workers, are the proletariat. Are these people having a good life? No. Okay. Marx believed the bourgeoisie, the factory owners, were extracting the true value of labor from the proletariat, and so they're just like taking all of their productivity. In the middle, are the factory owners really in the factory? Like, you know, like if Shelby's working in the factories, are they going, psh, work Shelby, psh, work Shelby? No, they're not. Who's doing that? It's going to be the managers. And that's the petite bourgeoisie. Okay, and literally what this means, petite means what?
Small.
Small. It's the small or the little rich. The small rich, which is the middle class. And these guys are so desperate to move up there that they're going to, for Marx, they're going to suck up and do whatever the rich say. Okay, so they're actually, and many times, going to be meaner to the workers, the proletariat, than for Marx, than the bourgeoisie are. But what is the bourgeoisie ultimately only concerned with? Their money and their money alone. Do they care about anything else? Negatory. That's all they care about. They just care about their money. Now, and he thinks this is kind of a terrible thing. And what are most people? They're not petite. In our country, we claim that everybody's middle class, but Marx is like, no, most people are actually proletariat or working class. Okay? So, what Marx is going to say is what's eventually going to happen is we're going to get to a fifth stage. And the fifth stage is communism. Now, what's going to happen in this fifth stage? Okay? What's going to happen in this fifth stage for Marx is that finally the bourgeois, the proletariat are going to be class conscious. And what does class conscious mean? It means that they're going to realize that they're being exploited. You know, because Marx is going to say, and this is a very important concept, that there are two major tools that keep folks being shackled. Okay? And he's going to say it's religion and it's nationalism. Okay? And in fact, Marx is an avowed atheist. He's going to say that religion is the opium of the masses. Okay? Now, not that I'm implying that any of you are opium addicts at all, but Maria, what does opium do to somebody?
Shoot, I don't know.
You don't know?
No.
What?
Addiction.
They're addicted to it, and what do they just want if they're on opium?
Only opium.
They only want more opium. And so what he says is religion is used by the bourgeoisie, the rich, to justify the status quo or their exploitation. Okay? So how does that work? Well, Marx would say, look at the Bible where it says, blessed are the poor, for they shall inherit the kingdom of heaven. Marx would say, well, that's just a trope. There is no afterlife. And so the rich are taking their blessing now from the working class, and they're telling the poor people, it's okay, you're going to get yours when you die. And you're actually not going to be getting anything. Religion is like a Jedi mind trick, Marx is going to say. He says nationalism's the same way. Because what are most wars fought for? Large economic business interests, is what Marx is saying. Okay? And so what he's arguing then is that you don't really, it's not about working class people. Nationalism, we all salute the flag. Marx, for instance, would look at military service in the United States today. Do you know what kinds of people tend to serve in the military? Poor working class people. Who gets the most benefit from our country? Rich. Rich folks. And he would say that nationalism is used as a tool to manipulate them. Now that's the Marxist interpretation. I'm not trying to say you need to agree with Marx at all. I'm just telling you what that is. Yes, comrade.
Yes.
I understand. So, we're going to finally you're going to have class consciousness. You're going to be aware. You're going to realize that these things, we're going to have class consciousness. Thank you, sir. And thank you as well.
Were you taking your midterm?
You did.
How do you think it went?
Okay, so, now, what's going to happen once people become class conscious? The alarms are going to go off. That's what's going to happen. People are going to realize now for the first time that they have been exploited. And what are they going to do? They're going to rise up. Workers of the world, unite. You have nothing to lose but your chains. That is the quintessential message of the Communist Manifesto. Okay? So rise up. And they're going to realize, the proletariat are going to realize that they're being oppressed. And that they're going to have to rise up and they're going to overthrow the petit bourgeois or the bourgeoisie and the bourgeoisie themselves. And how are they going to overthrow them? Violently, bloodily, guns. And they're going to kill them all. Then what's going to happen? Well, he's going to say that what's going to happen is that the means of production is going to be owned by the proletariat. We all going to own everything together. So, my 1999 Chrysler is going to be Susan's 1999 Chrysler. And it's going to be Shelby's 1999 Chrysler. It's going to be Bridget's 1999 Chrysler. We're all going to be sharing what we have together. Your kickstart is our kit. Whoa. The can is all of ours. Your scrunchie on your hand, Madeline, is going to be the scrunchie for us all. Okay? My Mickey Mouse tie is going to be everyone's Mickey Mouse tie. You know, we're all going to share everything. Okay? Now, do you see one problem with Marxist analysis here?
People will try to use that. Stalin.
Yeah. What did you say? Good. Polygamy. Well, that's not really it.
You said they share everything.
Well,
Swingers, not polygamy.
yeah.
But yeah, like, if I own that, then one person, if everyone owns everything and then the government tries to, use that, then, yeah. Doesn't work very well.
You know, he said that what had motivated people throughout history was greed. He calls, the primary force in history is going to be something that he calls economic determinism, okay? Which is kind of a fancy philosophical term for greed. What is it that motivates people to do stuff? It's economic determinism. It's greed. Let me give you an example. You work at Sonic, right?
Unfortunately.
Okay, why do you work there? Because you love it.
Okay.
That it fulfills you. You feel on Maslow's hierarchy of human needs, you are now self-actualized.
I love cleaning up puke out of the sink.
Yes. So, you realize that that's not, you do it strictly for money.
Yes.
You know, as much as I love being here at Farmington High School and getting to know you fine young men and women, if I didn't receive a paycheck, I would not be here. You know why? I like to eat. I like stuff. Money is going to be what determines what we do. Now, Marx is going to say it's what determines everything. I don't agree with him on that. I think there are things that we do sometimes that, I, for instance, have some talents that I probably could have leveraged to higher economic gain than what I have done. However,
Basketball.
yes, I could have been the next Mike Trout.
I know.
$430 million, 13-year extension.
Yes.
He's like, yes.
I think if you took the salaries of everyone in the Farmington R7 school district over 30 years, it would not reach what Mike
No.
Trout makes
Oh, definitely.
in his
Is
career.
that per year?
No, he's guaranteed 30.
Yes, and Marx would say that's wrong.
Yeah.
Okay,
I would.
well, so what's going to happen then? He's going to say that we're based, all decisions are based on greed up until communism. And then what happens? We all sit around in a circle, sing Kumbaya, and we no longer are greedy. It's not family circle, but it's, we're not greedy anymore. The proletariat's going to share. So your kickstart is now Natasha's kickstart. Your binder
Motto for all.
is now your binder. Okay? We're going to share everything. Well, he's going to, for whatever reason, he thinks the proletariat's going to be more selfless. And he's run into some problems with that in communist nations. The means of production are going to be owned by everybody. We've already discussed this concept that he's going to say that religion and nationalism are the opiates of the masses. Now, Karl Marx. It saddened me yesterday that none of you knew these references here. This is actually photoshopped in here. This is Karl Marx.
They didn't actually take it?
What's that?
They didn't actually take it?
No, they really didn't. That's photoshopped. Karl Marx died in 1883. These are the Marx Brothers, who were a very famous comedy group in the first half of the 20th century. Groucho Marx was kind of like the first major stand-up comic in the United States. And he had a series of comedy films in the 30s, 40s, and 50s. And he was kind of, anyway, very famous. He was that guy right there. But anyway, never mind. It's before your time. But you all need to know who the Marx Brothers are, Groucho in particular. He's,
Are we ever going to cover the Three Stooges?
I'll have to work that in.
Yes.
But that's only once we get to more modern stuff. All right. So, how then does Marx relate to today? Why do we care? So I've explained everything. He's the father of communism. We bring him up to this point, and once we get to communism, there's not going to be any personal property. The state's going to wither away. religion's going to disappear, nationalism's going to disappear. So ultimately in communism, he says there's not going to be separate countries. There's just going to be one universal world organization. We're all going to be one. Because he says, what is nationalism again? It's a tool for the bourgeoisie to exploit the workers, right? Okay. So he says we're gonna stop all of this. Now, ultimately, what's the problem?
Who's gonna rule over everything?
Who's going to rule over everything? It's inefficient to have everyone rule over everything, particularly if it's worldwide and not even like a city-state like Athens. Okay? There are other couple of problems that we're going to have with Marx. First of all, what becomes the first communist nation in the world? Russia. Now, Russia becomes communist on November 7th, 1917, my birthday.
Happy birthday.
Thank you. I'm 102.
Yes.
Look really good.
I moisturize.
Botox works in here.
It
It's all the
doesn't
essential
though.
oils.
That's all right. Now, what's the problem with Marx's theory of history and Russia becoming the first communist nation?
Well, Russia didn't get to be industrialized, did they?
Russia was not industrialized. You are so correct. Russia was not an industrialized nation. So you had a nation that was at the feudal stage becoming industrialized. So they skipped a historical stage. Okay? What nations would have Marx predicted that would have become communist? Britain. What else? Germany. What else? Us.
America.
Okay. Okay, so none of those nations ever became communist. Another problem with Marx, or why he's important, Russia becomes communist. What do they change their name to? The Soviet Union after 1917. And who's their first leader?
Stalin.
Not Stalin. It's V.I. Lenin. Okay, then he dies, and then it's Stalin. And what does Stalin do? Is he like,
He's awesome.
No.
okay, what do you mean by awesome here? This kind of scares me a little. Yes, he kills millions of people. I love it.
He's yummy. That's what she means.
Oh,
When he
you
was
take the
younger.
stash, you're like,
Yeah.
I
I'm a stash kind of gal.
uh,
Like, when he
I love my studly mustachioed.
Hitler, Stalin. Elizabeth.
You realize this is being filmed.
I'm gonna play this back.
Okay, so what's the problem with Stalin? What does Stalin do to everybody?
Kill.
He kills
He kills them.
millions of people. Okay, what's communism about? Peace, love, everyone sharing. Does that involve like mass murder and genocide?
Minor flaw.
Minor flaw. Minor flaw. Okay, so that's a little bit of a problem. Okay, who starts freaking out against communism in a big bad way?
We did.
The United States. Okay, you're right. So they become communist in 1917. They kind of hibernate and try to build their country into an industrial power, which they do through terror and mass murder. Okay, 1939 to 1945. There's this major thing that happens in world history. What's this major thing that happens?
Great pressure.
World War II.
Oh, wait.
Kind of.
This is
I
my
mean,
The
favorite.
Great Depression's there at the beginning, but it starts in the late
And
20s. Okay, so World War II. Who are the American allies in World War II?
Russia.
Yeah, the Soviet Union, Communist Soviet Union, Russia. Who else? Britain and France and China. Okay, those are the big five. Okay, now who wins World War II?
We did.
We do.
We do, and as does the Soviet Union and Britain and France and China. Now, here's the problem. After World War II, furthermore, who was our number one enemy in World War II?
Germany.
Germany in Europe, anyway. Yes, Germany. And is Germany located in the middle of Europe?
Yes.
Yeah, it kind of is. So the Soviet army marched east, we marched west, and we met kind of in the middle of Germany. Okay? which meant when the war ended, who did we, the United States, see as our number one threat in the world?
Soviet Union?
The Soviet Union or Russia. So what happened is that basically there was a dividing line. Okay, we didn't declare actual fights, okay? But what's going to happen is the United States, okay, in the Cold War, the United States and the Soviet Union are going to be two diametrically opposed powers, more or less bent on trying to be the major superpower in the world. Okay? Now, let me explain a couple of things about communism during this period. The United States was very concerned that communism would spread. And we were very concerned that communism would spread because right after World War II, one of our allies in Asia became communist, and that was China. China was the world's most populous country, okay? And in 1949, because they'd had a civil war for several years, but in 1949, a guy by the name of Mao, or Chairman Mao, became the communist leader of China, and China still is communist to this day, okay? So 49, China becomes communist. We become very concerned, okay? We think that communism is going to spread, and Mao is MAO, okay? We become very concerned that communism is going to spread everywhere. So our president in the late 40s was Missouri's own Harry S. Truman, okay? Now, Harry S. was the first guy to basically start America's Cold War policies. And he's going to help develop the following Cold War policies. Okay? And what are these Cold War policies?
Was this like the Red Scare?
Yes. Okay, that era. So we're at the Cold War. And the Cold War basically, let's just say, is from 1945 to 1991. Okay? Here are some of President Truman's ideas. First is the Truman Doctrine. And the Truman Doctrine is going to say, we're going to help anyone, anywhere fight off communist aggression. Okay? Anyone, anywhere, any place, as long as they're not deep in the Soviet territory, we're going to help them fight off communist aggression. Number two is containment. Containment theory. And what is that? The idea behind containment theory is that communism is like a terrible disease. It's like gangrene. You know what gangrene is? The rotting of your flesh. What's the only way to keep gangrene from killing you?
Chop it off.
Chop it off. So you must contain it. So if North Korea is communist, what must you do? Chop it off. You must separate North and South Korea. You must separate North and South Vietnam. You've got to contain communism. If you don't, another doctrine during this period was the domino theory. If you don't, then that region geographically will fall like a series of dominoes. You know, you stack them up, you flip the domino over. So, I vividly remember as a child, early teenager, some 11, 12, 13, President Reagan going on TV. And Nicaragua had elected the Sandinistas, Daniel Ortega, who was a communist. And President Reagan got on the TV and said, well, if we don't contain Nicaragua, pretty soon Honduras is going to be communist, then Guatemala, then Mexico, then Brownsville, Texas, then Houston, then Little Rock, and it goes on down the block. So what do you got to do? You've got to contain communism. Okay? So we understand the domino theory. And last but not least, after August 6th and August 9th, 1945, when we drop atomic bombs on Japan, what do we now have? We now have atomic bombs, then nuclear bombs, and we have something called MAD. And Elizabeth, what's MAD?
Mutually assured destruction.
Mutually assured destruction. Thank you, Abby. Nice assist there.
I have
Okay.
those.
Okay, so what is MAD? Mutually assured destruction. That was another major doctrine. There were just two major nuclear powers at this time, the Soviet Union and the United States. And we told the Soviet Unions, if you ever launch a preemptive nuclear strike, that is, you try to launch first, we're going to push all of our buttons and we're going to launch all of our missiles. And guess what's going to happen? We're all dead. So if you want to try that, comrade, big boy, you go for it. You just try to launch it all. Okay?
Yeah.
Now, and the only people who would survive, well, would be cockroaches, and they're not really people. But I mean, yeah, biologically, cockroaches would make a radiation attack. Yeah. So, folks, you might say, well, what does all of this have to do with Karl Marx and 19th century Romanticism and his ideas against the Industrial Revolution? He birthed communism. Communism birthed, the idea of communism birthed the Russian Revolution. The Russian Revolution birthed the Cold War, which birthed all of these doctrines. And folks, this really went till just about 1991, which I know is not quite your lifetime, but it's really close. It's really close. And if you look at contemporary politics today, some Americans feel a little uneasy with contemporary politicians buddying up with Russia, largely because Russia was like the United States' #1 enemy from like World War II until the 90s. And it just seems kind of weird. It would be like here at Farmington, suddenly we're just in a big love fest with North County. You're like, what? We're supposed to hate them, and now we love them? Ah! You know, and so you understand the Cold War? Okay? Now, I do want to mention before we leave this, we did fight, and you know, Bridget had said, well, we didn't actually fight. We didn't fight the Soviets directly, but there were a series of what were called proxy wars, where we would fight people that they funded and they would fight people that we funded. Why didn't, so two of those wars would be like Vietnam, which depending on when you want to start it, could go nearly 20 years from 1955 to 75, but really didn't escalate until after the Gulf of Tonkin in 64, and the Korean War. From 1950 to 53, there were a lot of other skirmishes involved, you know, Cuban Missile Crisis, Bay of Pigs, you name it. But this is a big deal. And so Marx, today I know is kind of receded, but when I was in high school, Marx was like a huge deal. Everybody talked about him. I don't know if you've had much experience with him as a thinker, but he really did resonate with much of the development of the 20th century. And one of the things that's good and bad sometimes with history, teaching history, is we tend to like move chronologically from era to era, like here's Marx, then later here's the Cold War, or here's Stalin, but it actually all kind of goes together in one long story arc. Okay, questions? Questions? You got it? You know him? Okay, one other thing that one other guy that I want to hit real briefly today is this dude, Auguste Comte. That's a French postage stamp there with his lovely picture on it. Comte is going to develop something called positivism. And he is a romanticist as well. He's kind of like the father of social sciences, one of the fathers of social sciences, like sociology. And Comte, excuse me, is going to be arguing, going to develop something called positivism. And like Hegel and Marx, he believed that history was really the motivating engine of world development. And Comte is going to be arguing that there are three basic stages to human development. And what human development is, he doesn't mean like Brian is a baby growing. He means like he means like macro human development, like all human society. Okay? The first stage, he would say, is the theological stage. And he would say, how did primitive people explain everything? Okay? Well, primitive people would explain things because through gods who lived in nature. So, why did the ancient Mesopotamians, how did they interpret the flooding of the Tigris and the Euphrates?
The gods were mad.
The gods were mad, okay? How would the Egyptians interpret the flooding of the Nile? The gods are mad. So everything was kind of explained through supernatural divinity. Then people got a little more sophisticated. And the next stage he called the metaphysical stage. And what is the metaphysical stage? That basically means metaphysics, literally means beyond physics or beyond the natural explanation. He said, well, things got a little more sophisticated. And, given that he's a European, he's focusing on just one major world religion, and that's Christianity. And he said, okay, now we've got a little bit more sophisticated idea of explaining morality. It's still based on the supernatural, however. So he would say, like, the incarnation of Jesus, of God, in Jesus and Christianity, explaining human nature and all of those kinds of things, would fit in this. So, Aquinas and Augustine and other Christian thinkers are going to be a bit more sophisticated, trying to apply some reason, but also applying faith. Okay? The third stage, he said, was going to be the crowning achievement of all human history. And that is going to be the positive stage. And that's why he's called a positivist, because he's just like the crowning stage for Marx was what stage? Communism. And so, what's his idea called? Communism. Okay. Positivism. He's going to say that, wow, the world's getting better. It's getting better all the time. And guess what we're doing? We're getting it, he's saying we're making the world better through science, through empiricism. And, he's basically saying that science is going to have a learning curve where everything is going to get better. And I would argue that a lot of people probably bought that argument until World War I and World War II. When suddenly people like machine guns, nerve gas, World War II, atomic bombs, maybe technology isn't making the world a better place. I would even go further to say in the 21st century, if you look at depression rates today, since the advent of the smartphone, they have just skyrocketed. And I don't say that that's necessarily the only reason, but I don't know that technology has certainly made some aspects of our life better, but I don't know that Comte is right in saying that it is going to constantly just make us better and better and better human beings. Because I think technology sometimes has also caused as many problems as it has thrown down. I mean, you look at pollution, for example. Was there a massive pollution problem 500 years ago?
No.
Why not?
Because there wasn't any technology to pollute.
Yeah, I mean, if you made a mug, what was the mug made out of?
Clay.
Clay. And what's going to happen to clay?
It'll just go back into the system.
Okay, now what if I have a plastic tumbler?
People are gonna die.
How many millennia will it be here?
A lot.
Forever. And ever and ever. So I think we've got, what's that? Oh, thought somebody said. Well, and I think this is kind of the key. Comte is going to argue really that, society is always going to get better. And 19th century Romanticism is going to look at that, but today, not so much. Okay. let's stop there today. Any questions? Do you have any questions for the upcoming exam on Friday? I think we've covered most of the material you need now that we went through Marx and Comte today.